He kissed her, in front of 200 people, in the middle of the Grand Meridian ballroom, marble floors, chandelier light, champagne glasses still midair. A janitor in a gray uniform pressed his lips to the most powerful woman in the room, and the entire crowd went dead silent. No one moved. No one breathed. Someone dropped a fork, and the sound of it hitting the floor was the loudest thing in the building. His name was Billionaire Heiress. He pushed a cleaning cart for a living. He wore rubber-soled shoes and a name badge with a small grease stain on the corner that he had been meaning to replace for 2 weeks. He was nobody in this room. He knew it. Everyone knew it, and he kissed her anyway. Hi, viewers. Have you ever done something you knew the world would misread, but you did it anyway because it was the right thing to do? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. Hit the subscribe button for more stories like this. You won't believe what happened next. The woman he kissed was Selwyn Ashford Hart, 36, billionaire heiress. The kind of name that gets spoken carefully, the way people speak around something they are afraid to break. She wore a floor-length navy dress, diamond earrings that probably cost more than a house, and the expression of a woman who has spent her entire life being the most important person in every room she enters. She was also about to lose consciousness. Nobody in that room knew that except Marion. The argument had started 20 minutes earlier. Selwyn stood near the center table, her champagne glass in her right hand, her jaw locked so tight the muscle along her cheek had been twitching for the past 6 minutes. The man across from her, a CFO named Brenton Calloway, was speaking in the kind of measured, deliberate tone that does not need to raise itself because it has never once been told no. His hands moved smoothly. His voice was controlled. His words were surgical. The guests around them kept their eyes moving, to drinks, to phones, to each other, the way people do when they are watching something they have decided is not their concern. Demarion was 40 feet away near the East Service Corridor, collecting glasses from a cleared dessert table. His cart moved quietly. His hands worked without looking, but his eyes were somewhere else entirely. He watched her breathe. Not her face, not the argument, her chest, the rhythm of it. The way it had been shifting for the past 4 minutes, from something steady into something that was no longer steady at all. He saw the shallow pull, the too quick exhale, the half-second freeze between breaths that a person could blink and miss. He had seen this before. He knew what came next. Her free hand lifted slightly from her side, an involuntary rise, a fraction of an inch, and then dropped back. His cart stopped. He moved. Not fast enough to alarm, not slow enough to be too late. He crossed the marble floor with the focused, unhurried movement of a man who has been trained to arrive at the right moment and not a single second before it. 14 steps. 2 guests sidestepped. 1 near apology he swallowed. He reached her as her knees started to give. He caught her, one arm around her back, firm and immediate, and the room's sharp inhale was audible. Her champagne glass left her hand. He did not watch it fall. She was breathing in the wrong pattern, short, too fast. The body locked inside a loop it could not exit on its own. He had 4 seconds, maybe 5. He did the only thing that would work. He cupped her face with his right hand. He kissed her. The room turned to stone. 1 full second, 2. He felt the moment her diaphragm responded, the involuntary full-body gasp of lungs remembering what they were supposed to do. Color returned to her face before she even opened her eyes. Her chest expanded. Her shoulders dropped from where they had been locked against her ears. She gasped, air, real air, full air, the kind that does not need to be chased. He stepped back. He straightened. He looked at her. Once, directly, just long enough to confirm what he needed to confirm, and then he turned back toward his cart. "You're all right," he said. Quiet, without looking. He meant it the same way a paramedic means it. Clinical, factual, done. But the 200 people in that room heard something else entirely. Security was already moving. 2 men in black suits, professional and expressionless, closed the distance before Selwyn had taken her 3rd full breath. They took Demarion by the arms with practiced efficiency. He did not resist. He did not explain. He looked at Selwyn one more time, not with apology, not with defiance, with something harder to name than either of those things, and then he walked. The doors closed behind him. The chandeliers kept burning, and somewhere in the back of that silent, frozen room, A woman in a navy dress stood breathing, alive, steady, confused, while 200 people decided they already knew the story of what had just happened. Not one of them asked why a man with nothing to gain would cross a room and risk everything. Not one of them asked what he saw that they didn't. And Demarion Reyes walked into the service corridor and into the most damaging night of his life for doing the only thing that could have saved hers. The doors clicked shut, and the room exhaled like it had been holding itself underwater. Someone said, "Oh my God." Someone else laughed, the short, uncomfortable kind that fills space when people do not know what else to do with their faces. A cluster of women near the champagne station leaned together, voices low, eyes tracking Selwyn Ashford Hart with the focused attention of people composing a story in real time. The story was already wrong. Selwyn stood where Demarion had left her. Her champagne glass was on the floor, stem intact, bowl cracked at the base, a small pale spill spreading across the marble, and she was looking at the door. Not at the crowd, not at Brenton Calloway, who had already taken 2 careful steps away from the center of the scene. Not at the security guard who had bent down to collect the broken glass with the professional efficiency of someone paid to make things disappear quickly. She was looking at the door. Her breathing was even. Her hands were still. Her chest was doing exactly what it was supposed to do, and she was aware of this. Acutely. Privately aware, in the way that a person becomes aware of a function only after it has briefly stopped working. The head of security, a broad-shouldered man named Caswell, appeared at her left shoulder. "Miss Ashford Hart," his voice was low and careful. "I want to assure you the situation has been handled. The employee has been removed from the premises, and HR will process a formal termination by end of tonight. You have our complete—" "What's his name?" she said. Caswell paused. The pause was half a second, but in the context of the conversation, it was enormous. "I'm sorry?" "The janitor." She turned to look at him then. "His name?" Another pause. "Reyes, Demarion Reyes. He's been with the contracted cleaning service for approximately 14 months. I want to emphasize that what occurred tonight was entirely outside of acceptable. Is he still in the building?" "He's being processed out through the service exit as we speak." She said nothing. Caswell cleared his throat and delivered the rest of his script. Protocol, HR follow-up, formal documentation, and she let him. She accepted a fresh champagne glass from a passing server and held it without drinking. She allowed the concerned orbit of her business partner, Tondra Whitfield Gray, who appeared at her side with the practiced speed of someone who monitors a room for liability. She said the right things to 6 different people in the next 11 minutes. She said she was fine. She said yes, it was alarming. She said she appreciated everyone's concern. She was performing and she knew it. And no one in the room knew she knew it, which was the most disorienting part of all. Because underneath the performance, one question was running on a loop she could not shut off. What did he see? The argument with Brenton had been real. That much was true. He had been angling for a board restructure that would effectively strip 2 of her appointed directors of any operational power. And he had chosen this evening, this room, this crowd of witnesses to surface it. He was deliberate. He was strategic. He knew she could not respond with the full force of what she knew without turning a business dispute into a public spectacle. So she had held it. All of it. The anger, the calculated response, the 3 counterpoints she was building toward. She had held it in the way she had learned to hold difficult things. Tightly, quietly. The way you carry something fragile in a crowd. She had not told anyone that her hands were shaking. She had not told anyone that the edges of the room had started to blur. She had not told anyone that for approximately 40 seconds, the part of her brain responsible for keeping her upright had been negotiating with the part responsible for consciousness. And that negotiation had been going badly. Demarion Reyes knew, without being told, without being asked, without any reasonable explanation for how a man pushing a cleaning cart 40 feet away would be watching closely enough to catch what no one standing directly in front of her had noticed. She set down the untouched champagne glass on the nearest table. "Tondra," she said quietly. "Get the car." She said her goodbyes with the efficiency of a woman who has been leaving rooms gracefully since before she knew the word for what she was doing. Driver at the side entrance. City opening up around the car. Dark outside, bright inside the way city nights always are. Electric and indifferent and full of people who do not know her name. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and looked at the seat in front of her and ran through every second of the past hour. The moment her breath shortened, the moment her free hand lifted and she had not told it to, the moment the room went soft at the edges, the exact moment she stopped being entirely in control of what her own body was doing. And then him. 14 steps across a marble floor. No hesitation, no explanation. The contact, the air, the gasp. The color coming back into her vision like someone slowly turning up the light in a dark room. He stepped back and went back to his cart. He said 2 words. He let them take him without a single word of defense. She opened her phone in the darkness of the back seat, typed a name into the search window, found an employment profile, 3 lines long, a contracted service, 14 months, no other detail. She stared at it. Then she closed the screen and looked out the window at a city that was already moving on, the way cities always do, indifferent to the small events that contain everything. Billionaire Reyes had been escorted out of the building before a single person in that room thought to ask the one question that would have changed everything they believed they saw. And in the morning, 200 people would wake up with a story about a janitor who crossed a line. None of them would know they were telling the wrong one. 5:47 in the morning. The apartment was the kind of quiet that only exists before the world remembers to be loud. Demarian moved through it without turning on the main light. Just the small one above the kitchen stove, the one that gave everything a warm second-hand glow, the one Zaria had picked out from a home goods store on a Tuesday afternoon years ago, when they were still the kind of people who made plans on Tuesdays. He did not think about Zaria before 6 in the morning. That was the rule. He opened the refrigerator, took out the bread, set a pan on the back burner. His hands moved with the ease of a routine repeated enough times that the body no longer needed instruction. A kind of muscle memory that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with love. He made Nayla's breakfast first, always. The egg went into the pan. He listened to it settle. Through the small window above the sink, the sky was the color of old iron, dark blue bleeding into gray, the early morning signature of a city that does not wait for permission to begin. He heard a delivery truck 2 blocks over, a dog somewhere, a door. He did not think about the ballroom. He thought about it constantly. He pulled a folded piece of paper from the kitchen drawer, the drawing Nyla had left on the table the night before, done in crayon, showing 2 stick figures holding hands under what might have been a sky full of flowers or a sky full of stars. She wrote their names at the bottom, his name first. His name was written in purple because purple was, in Nayla's current and fiercely held opinion, the most serious color. He folded it twice, tucked it into the side pocket of her lunchbox. She would find it. She never said anything about it. She always found it. The termination call had come at 11:58 the night before. A recorded voice delivered it in the clean procedural language of organizations that have processed enough of these to have removed the human texture from them entirely. 2 weeks severance, a formal letter to follow, account access terminated. He listened to the whole thing. He noted the relevant information. He deleted it. He had lost a job before. The eggs finished, he plated them. He set the table for 2 small plates, the ones with the blue rim that Nayla had chosen herself from the dollar store with the focused deliberation of a person making a very permanent decision. At 6:30, he opened her bedroom door. Nayla Reyes was 7 years old and slept the way most 7-year-olds sleep, with the full physical commitment of someone who has decided that consciousness is optional. She was on her stomach, one arm hanging off the bed, her hair everywhere, wearing a t-shirt that was technically his from a time in his life he did not discuss, and that she had claimed 18 months ago without negotiation and had worn as a nightshirt ever since. He said her name once. She moved. He said it again. She surfaced slowly, the way something rising through deep water surfaces, with effort, with resistance, with the particular brand of morning betrayal that only children and the deeply unbothered can produce. She sat up. Her eyes were half open. Her hair was its own architecture. "Daddy," she said. The word had no preamble. It arrived fully formed, like most of the things Nayla said, as if she had been awake inside her sleep all along, just waiting. "Breakfast is ready." She slid off the bed and landed on the floor and walked to the bathroom without fully opening her eyes. He heard the water run. He heard her brush her teeth with the thoroughness of someone who takes the task very personally. She came to the table 3 minutes later, more present now, and sat down and began eating with the focused efficiency of a child who is always hungry in the morning and mildly suspicious of anyone who claims not to be. She told him about her dream. It involved a horse, a disagreement, a submarine, and a rule about maps that she explained in great detail. He listened to every word, not politely, not patiently. He listened the way he had always listened, with his full attention, the kind that does not wander, the kind that treats the speaker as the most important source of information in the room. It was the same way he had listened in rooms that were nothing like this kitchen. The rooms where listening was not courtesy, but survival. He put her lunchbox in her backpack. The drawing was already in the side pocket. She stood up from the table and walked to him and wrapped both arms around his middle, head against his chest, arms reaching just past his shoulder blades, and held on with the kind of certainty that only children have about the people they love. He held her back. "Daddy," she said into his shirt. "Yeah." She pulled back and looked up at him. Her mother's eyes, that same precise reading look, the one that always caught him when he was not prepared for it. "You always know when somebody needs help," she said. He looked at her. "I try," he said. She shook her head with the patient correction of someone who has already decided this conversation is settled. "You do it," she said, "not just try." Then she picked up her backpack, walked to the door, and was gone. He stood in the kitchen for a moment. The drawing, the lunchbox, the blue-rimmed plates, the way she said his name in the dark like it was a whole sentence. He turned off the stove light. He went to find a new job. What he did not know, what he had no way of knowing, was that on the other side of the city, in a building he would never enter, someone had already opened a search window and typed his name. Go back, rewind to 9:14. The ballroom at its fullest, 212 people, glasses in hand, voices layered over the low pulse of string music coming from the quartet near the south wall. The air warm and close, the way it always gets when wealth and proximity share a space. Candles on every table, champagne in constant motion, the particular smell of expensive perfume and heated ambition. Demarion is at the East Dessert Station. He is not thinking about Selwyn Ashford Hart. He first notices her at 9:04 p.m., and he notices her for the same reason he notices a cracked support beam or a gas line that smells slightly wrong. Not because he is looking for a problem, but because his eyes have been trained for a decade to find things that do not fit. And she does not fit. Everyone else in the room is moving. Lifting glasses, shifting weight, the quiet, constant motion of a crowd at ease. Selwyn is still. Not the stillness of confidence, the stillness of someone holding themselves together with both hands. He marks her, continues working. 9:07, the argument with Calloway begins. Demarion does not hear the words. He is too far, and the music covers the low register. But he watches her posture shift. The shoulders pull higher, the jaw locks. The champagne glass in her right hand stops moving to her lips. She holds it, but she does not drink. 9:09. She takes a breath that is shorter than the breath before it. He puts down the glass he is collecting. In another life, the life before this city, before the gray uniform and the rubber-soled shoes and the cleaning cart, Demarion spent 4 years inside a federal close protection unit that specialized not in weapons, but in bodies. Specifically, what bodies do when the mind is under extreme pressure. The cardiovascular signals, the breath patterns, the involuntary gestures that the conscious will cannot override once the autonomic system has taken the wheel. He was trained by a physician named Dr. Celestine Okafor, who had spent 30 years in emergency medicine before the government found her, and Dr. Okafor had one rule she repeated at the beginning of every training session. The body tells the truth before the person does. Demarion believed her then. He believes her now. 9:11, Calloway's voice drops. A specific tonal drop that Demarion has seen precede escalation in negotiating rooms, in boardrooms, in interrogation settings. Not louder, quieter. The kind of quiet that means the speaker has stopped trying to persuade and started trying to wound. Selwyn's breath pattern changes. The intervals between breaths are lengthening. Not because she is calm, because her body is beginning to redirect resources. Blood pressure shifting, vagal tone rising, the physiological cascade that precedes a vasovagal event, running its sequence with the cold efficiency of a machine following its own instructions. Others are watching her face. Near her hands, the argument as theater. Demarian is watching her chest, 9:14, the delayed exhale, a one-beat pause after the inhale where there should be no pause. He knows this pause. He has seen it in the field in 3 separate situations, and in one situation he was too far away, and in one situation someone else caught it first, and in one situation he caught it in time, and the person is still alive and does not know his name. He sets down his cart, 9:15. He is crossing the room. He is not moving fast enough to attract attention, not sprinting, not weaving, but his feet are covering ground with a focus that has nothing to do with cleaning. He is calculating distance, angle, the position of the security detail, the cluster of guests between him and her. And he is running an assessment that most people in this room would not know was possible. He reaches her at 9:15 and 40 seconds. At this range, he can see things the room cannot. The gray sitting just under her eyes, the slightly bluish tint at the lip line, minutes away from full syncope. Her free hand rising involuntarily at her side, an eighth of an inch off her hip, the body sending its last conscious override before the system takes control entirely. 3 seconds. He catches her as the knees begin to give. Her body drops toward him, not dramatic, not a theatrical fall, just the quiet surrender of a frame that has run out of argument, and he takes her weight with both arms, turning her head slightly, clearing her airway before she even registers that he is there. He does what he was trained to do. The intervention, the deliberate respiratory stimulus, the pressure that shocks the diaphragm back into rhythm, takes 4 seconds. He has done it 11 times in training, twice in the field. Once in a corridor where he was too slow by a margin that still lives behind his eyes at 3 a.m. He is not too slow this time. The gasp is immediate. The color returns. Her lungs take air in the full, involuntary way that means the loop has been broken and the body has remembered its instructions. He steps back. He returns to his cart. He says 2 words, what he does not say, what he will not say, not in that room, not to security, not to the agency rep who calls him at midnight, is this. He saw it at 9:04 and he watched it for 10 minutes because he was hoping he was wrong. He was hoping someone standing directly in front of her would see it. He was hoping the crowd of people with the best possible view would catch what he was catching from 40 feet away. They didn't. Nobody looked. Nobody looked because looking in rooms like this is the job of the people paid to look. And the people paid to look were watching the argument, not the woman inside it. Demarian was not paid to look. He looked anyway. And the thing that nobody in that room will ever know, the thing that will not appear in any incident report or termination letter or whispered account of the evening, is that this was not the first time he had seen exactly this. The last time, he had a reason not to act. He acted anyway and still arrived too late. He has never forgiven himself for the gap between the moment he knew and the moment he moved. He will not carry another one. The service corridor outside the Grand Meridian Ballroom is a different world. Gray concrete walls, fluorescent tubes that hum at a frequency the body absorbs before the ears register it, the smell of floor cleaner and industrial detergent, and the faint metallic edge of the building's ventilation system. A folding table against one wall with a half-empty coffee maker no one has turned off. This is the real architecture of buildings like the Grand Meridian. The part guests never see, the bones underneath the marble. Demarian stood against the wall with his hands loose at his sides, while the taller security officer, whose badge read Caswell, spoke quietly into a radio at the far end of the corridor. He was not afraid. He had been in worse corridors. He had stood against walls with his hands at his sides while men with considerably more authority than Caswell decided what his next 12 hours were going to look like. And he had come through all of those intact. This one had no bars. It had no weather. The stakes were significantly lower. He was still doing the math. 2 weeks severance, rent was due in 18 days. The grocery run he had been planning for Saturday would need to adjust. He had $114 in checking and $226 in savings. And those numbers had been stable for 3 months, which meant stable was now disrupted, which meant the next variable was time. If the next job came in under 2 weeks, they were fine. If it came in between 2 and 4 weeks, there were choices to make. If it came in later than 4, he stopped the math there. He had always been better at moving forward than calculating what came behind. Caswell returned from the end of the corridor with the collected energy of a man who had received specific instructions and was now going to follow them precisely and without editorializing. Mr. Reyes, your employment contract has been terminated effective immediately. You'll receive a formal letter within 72 hours. Your badge and building access will be voided tonight. 2 weeks' pay will process to the account on file. Demarion nodded. Do you have any personal items in the staff area? No. Caswell looked at him for a half-second longer than the protocol required. Something moved behind his eyes. Not sympathy exactly, but the specific discomfort of a man who is carrying out a procedure he has some private uncertainty about. All right, he said. I'll walk you to the exit. They walked. The exit was a steel door at the end of a long corridor that opened onto a side alley between the hotel and the parking structure. The city came in immediately. Cool, moving, indifferent. A delivery truck idled at the far end of the alley. A woman was walking a dog on the sidewalk beyond. Caswell held the door. Demarion walked through. He did not look back. He walked to the end of the alley and turned onto the main street and kept going, his hands in the pockets of his gray uniform. The city reorganizing itself around him the way cities do, without notice, without acknowledgement, with the same blank, forward movement that has always been its only response to everything. He was 11 blocks from home. He walked, somewhere during the 6th block, past a late-night bodega, past a group of young men leaning against a parking meter, past the corner where a woman was waiting for a bus with a baby on her hip and a phone in her other hand, her face lit from below by the small light of the screen. He thought about the one moment that always arrives after the math is done. Not what happened, what he chose. The moment between recognition and action. The calculation that finished in less than a second and produced one output. Move. Not because anyone would thank him for it. Not because the room would understand. Not because his job would be protected, or his name would be remembered, or the outcome would be anything other than exactly what it turned out to be. Because she was going down. And he could stop it. And the last time he knew and waited, the cost was not his. It was someone else's. It was the worst possible version of the cost. The one you cannot undo or renegotiate or pay back after the fact. And he had lived inside that specific weight for 4 years. He would not live inside another one. He reached his building, took the stairs, 3rd floor, end of the hall. The key went in. The door opened onto the quiet kitchen, the stove light left on, the blue-rimmed plates stacked where he had left them. He sat down at the table in the dark, not turning on the overhead, just sitting in the warm, second-hand glow of the stove, and let the evening be what it was. He had done the right thing. He had lost a job for it. Both of those things were true at the same time, and he had enough experience with the world to know that the world does not always choose between them. At 11:58, the termination call came. He listened. He noted the information. He deleted the message. He went to bed. He was asleep before midnight. What he did not know, lying in the dark of his apartment while the city ran its night sounds outside the window, was that in a building on the other side of the city, in an East Wing library with the lights turned low, a woman in a navy dress was sitting with her shoes off and a glass of water she was actually drinking, and a laptop open to a 3-line employment profile. She was reading his name. She had been reading it for the past 40 minutes, and the question forming behind her eyes, the one she had been turning over and over since the car ride home, the one that had survived 2 phone calls and a glass of wine she had not touched, and 6 social interactions she had navigated on automatic, was not the question the room had asked. The room had asked, how dare he? Her question was different. Her question was, what exactly did he see? And the longer she sat with it, the more certain she became that the answer to that question was going to change everything she thought she knew about what happened in that ballroom. She closed the laptop. She opened it again. 14 months at the Grand Meridian Contract Service. Government contractor before that. 4 years. Description classified. Trauma clinical support before that. She read that last line again. Trauma clinical support. The laptop screen lit her face in the dark of the library, and outside, the city moved through its night with the steady, indifferent momentum of a thing that does not slow down for the moments that matter most to the people inside them. And Selwyn Ashford Hart sat very still in a very large house and understood, in the slow, uncomfortable way that real understanding comes, that she had sent the wrong man out of the building. She called Dr. Vivian Achebe at 9:03 in the morning. Not her assistant, not her chief of staff, not the family physician who had been on retainer for 11 years and who would have handled the calls with careful diplomatic language and 3 follow-up emails. She called Vivian because Vivian was the only doctor she had ever met who did not adjust what she said based on who was paying her. The phone rang twice. Selwyn! Vivian's voice was alert the way doctors' voices are always alert, even at 9 in the morning after a long night. Like the professional side of her brain never fully went off the clock. What happened? No preamble, no small talk. Selwyn had always appreciated this about her. I need you to walk me through vasovagal syncope, Selwyn said. The full sequence, what it looks like from the outside before it happens. A pause. Not a long one, the kind that means someone is recalibrating based on new information. Selwyn, did something happen last night? Walk me through it first. Vivian did. She spoke in the clean, an undecorated language of someone who explains complicated things for a living. The blood pressure drop, the drop in heart rate that follows it, the narrowing at the edges of vision, the involuntary muscle release that comes before the fall. She described the external signs, the breath pattern changes, the slight color shift at the lip line, the involuntary hand gestures the body produces when the conscious mind has begun to lose its grip on the controls. Selwyn listened to every word. When Vivian finished, the line was quiet for 3 full seconds. He saw all of it, Selwyn said, from 40 feet away, while he was working. Another pause, longer this time. Who did? A man named Billionaire Heiress. He was a janitor at the event last night. She paused, corrected herself. He was. He isn't anymore. Because of what he did when he saw it. She told Vivian about the intervention, the mechanics of it, the head angle, the pressure, the duration. She described it the way she had stored it in her memory. Not as a kiss, but as a sequence of deliberate physical actions with a specific and urgent purpose. When she finished, Vivian was quiet for a long time. Selwyn, she said finally, that is a respiratory stimulus protocol. It is used in emergency response settings when a patient is inside a vagal loop and standard positioning has not been enough to interrupt it. That is not something a person picks up from a first aid pamphlet or a basic CPR class. I know, Selwyn said. He knew exactly what he was doing. I know. And he was fired for it. The words landed with more weight than a sentence that short had any right to carry. Selwyn looked at the window. The city outside was going about its Tuesday. Traffic, scaffolding, a food cart being set up on the corner by a man in a yellow jacket who had probably been awake since 4 in the morning. Yes, she said, he was. She ended the call. She sat with the phone in her hand in the particular quality of guilt that does not come from doing something wrong, but from having the wrong information and choosing not to gather more before acting. The kind that does not have anyone else to share itself with, because the mistake was entirely hers. She thought about the argument with Calloway, the champagne glass she had been holding too tightly, a room full of people watching and not one of them seeing. Then she thought about a man 40 feet away who was not watching the argument, who was watching her, who saw the thing no one standing directly in front of her had caught. She thought about 2 words, you're all right. She picked up the phone again. Her chief of staff, Marcus Delaney Birch, answered on the first ring. She gave him 4 instructions in exactly the order she had organized them in her head. First, Billionaire Heiress's termination was to be reversed immediately. Full reinstatement, back pay for every day of wrongful termination, and a formal amendment to the incident record reflecting an accurate description of what had actually occurred. Second, the contracted cleaning service was to receive a full review, compensation structures, reclassification eligibility, and benefits access, with findings on her desk by end of week. Third, she wanted to know whether any of the Hart property's existing wellness protocols included emergency respiratory response training for service staff. Fourth, whatever the answer was to the third question, the answer from this point forward was going to be yes. Marcus was quiet for a moment. They don't currently include it, he said carefully. Then that was the fourth item, she said. Start there. She hung up. She stood at the window and watched the city do what it always did. Move forward without ceremony, without acknowledgement, with the same constant momentum that has always been its only response to everything. And she understood something she had not understood the morning before. She had spent 11 years building a name for herself around seeing what others missed. She had been in the same room as the most precise observer she had ever encountered. And she had let the room tell her what she saw. What she did not know yet, standing at that window while the coffee on the desk behind her went cold, was that Billionaire Heiress was at that exact moment sitting in the waiting area of an employment agency 6 blocks away, filling out a paper form with a pen that kept running out of ink. With Nyla's drawing of the blue horses folded in his breast pocket and no awareness at all that anything about his situation was about to change. He was just a man in finding the next job. Across the city, a woman who had the power to change the shape of his life was finally asking the right questions. What she still did not know was how much had already been lost in the 11 days before she started asking. That part would take longer to sit with. The letter came on a Thursday. Demarion found it in his mailbox at 6:42 in the morning, between a grocery circular and a water bill. The envelope had the contracted cleaning services logo in the upper left corner. He had received one from this same sender 11 days earlier. The formal termination document, 2 pages. Language he had read once and filed without sentiment. He carried this one upstairs before opening it. He set it on the kitchen table. He finished packing Neela's lunch. He put the kettle on. He did these things in order, deliberately, the way he did most things. Because an unopened envelope does not get to own the room before it has earned the right. When the kettle finished and the tea was poured, he sat down and opened it. He read it twice. He set it down and looked at the wall for a long moment with the particular stillness of a person processing information that does not fit the shape of the morning they were expecting. Full reinstatement. Back pay for the 11-day period. A formal amendment to the incident record with the event recharacterized in the documentation as an emergency health intervention performed by a trained first responder. He turned the letter over and looked at the back. There was nothing there. He heard Nyla's feet hit the floor, that specific, committed landing that meant she had not eased off the bed, but departed it with full conviction. She appeared in the kitchen 30 seconds later in her nightshirt and one sock, her hair an event. She looked at him, then at the letter, then at him again. Good news or bad news, she said. Somewhere between the two, he said. She sat down and pulled the cereal box toward herself and poured without being asked, which she was not technically supposed to do before breakfast was officially on the table, and he let it go because some mornings required that kind of quiet allowance. Somebody gave you your job back, she said. He looked at her. How do you know that? She considered this as though the question was slightly beneath her. Because you look like someone gave you something you weren't sure you were going to get. He picked the letter back up, read it a third time, set it down. He did not know who had authorized the reinstatement. The letter was on agency letterhead. The signature at the bottom belonging to a regional HR director whose name he did not recognize. The agency did not explain its administrative decisions to contract workers. He knew this. He had never expected otherwise. But someone had made a decision. Someone had looked at what happened in that ballroom and decided that the official version of it was wrong and that the wrong version was worth correcting. With back pay, with an amended record. Within 11 days, he thought about the only person in that room who had asked his name. He folded the letter, set it in the kitchen drawer beside the utility bills and the school calendar and Nyla's drawing of the purple horse. He went back to work the following Monday. The Grand Meridian at 6:30 in the morning was a completely different building from the one that hosted 200 people in formal wear. No chandeliers blazing, no champagne circulating, no crowd with its collective performance of not watching while watching. Just the high ceilings, the early light slanting through the east-facing windows, and the quiet of a building that had not yet been asked to be anything. He signed in, collected his cart, moved through the rooms in the same unhurried, methodical way that had always been his. He reached the ballroom at 6:45. He stood in the doorway for a moment. The room was empty, chairs restacked, tables folded, the marble floor dark and still, the chandeliers off, hanging above everything like something waiting to be needed again. He looked at the spot near the center table where her glass had fallen. Clean floor. No evidence. The building had moved past it. He moved past it too. He got down on one knee near the east wall and worked on a scuff mark he had spotted from 6 feet away. He stood. He continued his route. He did not know that 11 floors above him, in the hotel's executive conference suite, a meeting was already underway. That meeting had been scheduled by Selwyn Ashford Hart's office the previous week. Its agenda covered emergency response training for contracted service staff, benefit reclassification for workers across Hart-affiliated properties, and a review of how the incident at the Grand Meridian had been handled from first response to termination. His name was not on the agenda, but every item on it had started with him. And 3 floors below the conference suite, in the HR office, a new file had been flagged with a category that had not existed in the system 11 days earlier. Exceptional circumstances. Commendation pending. The man the file belonged to was on his knees cleaning a ballroom floor. He just kept working, because that was what he did. And somewhere in this city, in schools and hospitals and parking garages and late-night service corridors, there were hundreds of people doing exactly the same, quietly, without recognition, without a single person in authority asking the question that had started forming inside Selwyn Ashford Hart's chest 3 weeks ago and had not stopped since. Who is actually holding this world together? And what do we owe them? She saw him before he saw her. 3rd floor of the Ashford Hart Foundation building, a Tuesday morning in November. The kind of cold that makes the city honest. Sharper edges, whiter light, air with a quality that removes the softness from everything. Selwyn stepped out of the elevator and looked up from her phone, and there he was, end of the corridor. Gray uniform, rubber-soled shoes. He was refilling a paper towel dispenser near the restroom door, both hands occupied, his cart around the corner, out of sight. He had not heard the elevator. He had not seen her yet. She stopped. She had thought about this moment. Not obsessively. She was not the kind of person who orbited things she could not resolve, but with the steady, returning attention she brought to any problem that mattered and had not yet been properly addressed. She had thought about what she was going to say. She had rehearsed versions. She had discarded most of them. Now he was 20 feet away, and the time for rehearsal was finished. She walked toward him. He heard her footsteps on the tile and turned, and for a fraction of a second, before the professional composure that was his default settled back into place, something crossed his face that was not quite surprise, not quite recognition. Something that lived between those two things, like a door that opened briefly and then closed. He straightened. "Miss Ashford Hart," he said. "Reyes," she said. She stopped 3 feet from him, not close enough for the conversation to feel like a confrontation, far enough to give him the room the ballroom had not. She looked at him directly, without positioning, without the layer of careful social management she wore in meetings, on calls, in every professional encounter she had navigated for 11 years. "I was wrong about what happened that night," she said. He looked at her. "I was wrong about what I let the room believe, and I was wrong about the decision that followed." She held the next part steady before she said it. "You saw a medical emergency that I had not identified myself. You responded correctly and with knowledge that no one in that building credited you for. What happened to you afterward was not a consequence of what you did. It was a consequence of how fast a room can decide what it saw before asking a single question." The corridor was quiet. An HVAC vent hummed above them. 1 floor below, a phone rang twice and stopped. "I know," he said. 2 words. The same economy she had remembered. The same level, undefended directness. "I wanted to say this in person," she said, "not through a letter or a process." He nodded once. "Thank you," she said, "for what you did, for the way you did it." He held this for a moment. Not with discomfort, not with the performance of humility that people sometimes deploy when they are waiting to be told they are not responsible for the gratitude they are receiving. He held it the way he held most things, with his full attention, at its actual size, without making it smaller or larger than it was. "You're all right," he said. She recognized those words. She would always recognize them. And standing in the corridor in November, fully present and fully breathing, she understood what they meant in a way she had not been able to understand with her knees giving out on a ballroom floor 6 weeks earlier. Not a dismissal, a confirmation. You are here. The crisis has passed. You are going to be okay. Something moved in her chest. Not grief and not gratitude, but something larger and harder to name than either of those two things. The specific feeling of being seen clearly by someone who is not waiting for anything in return for seeing you. Is the work good? She said, because she could not think of anything else that was both true and small enough for the space between them. Something shifted in his face. Not a smile exactly, but close enough to its neighbor. It's good work, he said. I like early mornings. She nodded. She started to say something more, stopped. Because there was more. The full version of this conversation existed somewhere in her head, and it was longer and more complete and covered everything she had been turning over for 6 weeks. But standing in the actual corridor with the actual man, she understood that longer was not what this moment needed. The moment needed only what was true and direct. She had given it that. He had received it. That was complete. Take care of yourself, she said. You too, Miss Ashford Hart, he said. She walked back to the elevator, pressed the button, the doors opened. She stepped in, and as they closed, she looked down the corridor one final time, just once, and he was already back at the dispenser, both hands working, doing the job. She rode up alone, and in the elevator, for the first time since that night, she felt the weight of it begin to find its correct size. Not resolve, some things do not fully resolve, they simply stop being the wrong size, but settle. Settle into something she could carry without it carrying her. The doors opened on the executive floor. She had a board call in 9 minutes, a proposal to finalize before end of day, a restructure of the benefit access framework for 412 contracted workers across 6 Hart properties. She sat down. She opened the proposal. She signed it before the call. No hesitation, no revisions, because some decisions are made long before the paper arrives. They are made in ballrooms and service corridors, in quiet November hallways. They are made by the quality of attention a person brings to a room when nobody is asking them to pay attention. She had been close enough to that quality to feel it. Now she intended to do something with what she had felt. Nobody announced it. There was no press release, no ceremony, no executive standing at the front of a room explaining that things were going to be different now, and here was the reason why. Real change does not usually come with a speech. It moves the way water moves through old concrete, quiet, committed, appearing in places you did not plan for, doing the work without waiting for recognition. The first thing that changed was the training. 6 weeks after the Grand Meridian, every event venue under the Ashford Hart property umbrella began mandatory emergency response training for all staff. Not just the front of house team, not just the visible employees who guests interacted with by name, everyone. The contracted cleaning crews, the kitchen staff, the loading dock workers who arrived before anyone else and left after everyone. The people who kept the building running in the hours before it was asked to be beautiful. This exact training had been recommended in an internal safety audit 3 years prior. It had been tabled twice. The stated reason was cost. The actual cost, when someone finally did the math with full attention, was less than the floral arrangements for a single evening's event at the Grand Meridian. The second thing that changed was the classification. Marcus Delaney Birch delivered his findings on a Friday morning. The contracted service arrangements across 6 Hart-affiliated properties had been structured in a way that kept over 400 workers outside the company's benefits access. No healthcare coverage, no sick leave, no access to the wellness fund that had been available to full-time employees for years. The arrangement was not illegal. It was standard practice in the industry. Marcus noted in his summary that this was precisely the problem. The reclassification took 11 weeks. It required coordination across 3 legal departments and 2 contracted agencies and generated more paperwork than anyone on the project had anticipated. When it was finished, 412 people had healthcare coverage they had not had before. Not one of them received a letter explaining why it had changed. The paperwork arrived. The new access codes arrived. The system updated. 412 people went to work the next day with something they had not had the day before. And none of them knew a janitor at the Grand Meridian had anything to do with it. DeMarion did not know either. He was back on his route, back at the Grand Meridian by 6:30 every morning, working through the rooms in the same order, with the same attention, with the same unhurried focus that had always been the most consistent thing about him. He had trained 2 new members of the cleaning crew, passed on the route with the patience of someone who understood that doing a job well is only half the value. The other half is making sure the next person knows how to do it too. The new crew called him D. He did not correct them. On a Friday evening in December, he came home at 6:15 to find Nyla at the kitchen table with her sketchbook open, one arm covering the page, the specific body language of someone who is not finished and does not want a preview audience. He made dinner. He did not ask. She came to the table at 7 with the sketchbook closed under her arm and the expression of someone who has made a decision and is ready to deliver it. She opened the sketchbook to a page with a folded corner. It was a drawing of a man in a gray uniform. Tall, she always drew him tall, with large hands and a cleaning cart beside him. He stood in a room drawn in extraordinary detail for a 7-year-old. Long dresses, suits, a chandelier above everyone rendered in careful crayon. In the center of the room, one figure in navy stood apart from all the others. And the man in gray was the only person in the entire drawing who was not looking where the crowd was looking. He was looking at her. At the bottom of the page, in Nyla's careful handwriting, she had written one line. "My dad sees what everyone else forgets to look for." He looked at the drawing for a long time without speaking. "Can I keep this?" he said. She looked at him with the mild patience of someone who felt the answer was obvious. "I made it for you," she said. He folded it with the care he gave to every drawing she had ever made him. Deliberate, slow, like the paper held something that would not survive carelessness, and put it in his breast pocket. He did not know that 42 floors above the street he walked to work on every morning. A document had been finalized that afternoon redirecting a portion of the Ashford Heart Foundation's annual community investment toward emergency response training in underserved neighborhoods across 3 cities. He did not know that inside the document's internal justification memo, marked internal context, not for distribution, there was a single sentence that read, "This initiative was prompted by an incident in which a trained responder, misidentified and dismissed, recognized a life-threatening emergency that no one with official oversight authority had caught. The cost of that misidentification was borne entirely by the responder. This program exists to ensure that cost is never again what it takes to do the right thing. No name in the public version. Just the action, living forward, the way the best things always do." The essay came home on a Tuesday. Nyla's teacher, Miss Adrienne Fontaine Cross, had assigned it 3 weeks earlier. The topic was the person who shaped you most and why. Students could write about anyone, a parent, a neighbor, a coach, a stranger who showed up once at exactly the right moment. 2 weeks, 2 pages, and the only rule was that it had to be true. Nyla had not told Demarion what she was writing about. He had not asked. On the Tuesday, it came back. She set it on the kitchen counter while he was washing the dinner dishes, spine down, face up, and walked to her room without saying a word. He dried his hands. He picked it up. Her handwriting was careful and deliberate, the handwriting of someone who had decided on every word before committing it. He stood at the sink and read it with the dish towel still folded over his shoulder. She had written 4 paragraphs. The first was about the lunches, about the way he packed them the same way every morning. Triangle cut, crust removed, a drink that was always cold. About the drawings she found in the side pocket that were always her own work, returned to her on the mornings she most needed to be reminded that she made things worth keeping. The second paragraph was about the way he listened. Not the waiting kind, she wrote. Not the kind where you can tell the other person is already building their own response while you're still talking. The real kind. The kind where you feel like every word you're saying is landing somewhere it will actually be kept. The third paragraph stopped him at the kitchen sink. She wrote, "My dad does not have a famous job or a lot of money, but he is the most useful person I know. He notices things that other people walk right past. He helps people who do not know yet that they need help. He never asks to be thanked. He never seems to need anyone to know what he did. I think that is the rarest thing in the world. Most people do good things because someone is watching. My dad does good things when nobody is watching at all. That is a completely different thing." The fourth paragraph was one sentence. "He taught me that the most important question you can ask in any room is not what do I want. It is who needs something that I can give. He set the essay down on the counter. He looked out the window above the sink, the city at 8:30 in the evening, lit windows in the building across the alley. A bus passing, the particular orange-gray of a city sky that never goes fully dark, the light of 10 million people spilling upward into something that looks like a permanent, low, warm fire. His daughter was 7 years old. She had written the truest thing he had ever read about himself. He did not know yet that the essay would take first place in the district writing competition. He did not know that Miss Fontaine Cross, who had been teaching for 19 years and who had read more student essays than she could count, would read it aloud at the spring assembly and lose her composure briefly at the third paragraph, while Demarion sat in the third row of folding chairs in a pressed button-down shirt, not knowing what was coming. He did not know that Selwyn Ashford Hart, whose foundation had co-sponsored the district's Spring Arts and Literacy program, would read a summary of the winning essays that Friday morning and find one that stopped her mid-page. He did not know that she would read the line about nobody watching twice. He did not know that she would sit for a full minute after reading it without moving, in the way she had been learning to sit with things since November, with her full attention on them, without rushing toward the next item. He did not know any of this. He just stood at the sink in the kitchen light, holding his daughter's words, and felt the particular enormous weight of being seen clearly by someone who loves you, which is both the most terrifying and the most necessary thing one person can do for another. He folded the essay with the same care he gave everything that mattered. He put it in the kitchen drawer on the top of the pile, the utility bills, the school calendar, the reinstatement letter, all the small and specific pieces of a life lived carefully. He went back to the sink and finished the dishes. The water ran. 20 minutes later, Neela came in for a glass of water, looked at his face, and without asking a single question, wrapped both arms around him from behind and held on with the full conviction of a child who has decided that this is what you do when someone needs it. He put one hand over hers. They stood there for a moment, in the kitchen light, with the city outside the window, with the essay in the drawer, and the drawing in his breast pocket, and Nyla's breathing steady against his back. Then she let go and went to bed. He turned off the light. He stood in the doorway of her room in the dark, the way he always did. Just listening. Not looking for anything. Not doing anything. Just there the way he had always been. Present, attentive, asking nothing for it. Steady, deep. Right. He closed the door gently. He went to the window one last time and looked out at the city. All those lit windows, all those lives, all those people in their own kitchens and their own corridors and their own crowded rooms, deciding right now, in this very moment, whether or not to cross the floor. He had crossed it. He had paid the price for it. He had been given it back, and he had gone back to work, and the work had kept going, and what it all added up to was not a headline, was not a gala tribute or a plaque in a lobby or a story told by the 200 people who had been in the room that night. It was a child who knew what kind of man her father was. It was a woman who had started asking different questions. It was 412 people with health care on a January morning who did not know why. It was training that now existed, in rooms full of people who would never learn the name of the reason it was there, that would one day help someone standing exactly where he had stood, seeing exactly what he had seen, decide to move. He turned away from the window. He went to bed. Some people do not wait to be understood before they do what is right. And sometimes the people who change everything never stay long enough to see it. But the change stays. It always stays. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone who saw what the room missed, who acted when everyone else was waiting, who never asked to be thanked, then you are exactly where you are supposed to be. Subscribe to this channel right now and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. Every week we bring you the stories the world does not stop to tell, about the people doing the most important things in the most invisible places. Drop a comment right now and tell us, has someone ever crossed the room for you when nobody else moved? Tell us about them. Your words might be the only recognition they ever get. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. And come back for the next one. Tomorrow, a school custodian was told to stay in his lane until the day a child's life depended on exactly the skill they told him to put away.